Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Women City Club's Forum, Local News, Why It Matters, and How It is Changing. I'm Janet Buning. I am currently the Vice President of Programs for Women City Club, and I will be serving as the moderator for tonight's program. We thank you all for joining us on this wonderful panel discussion on a topic that really touches all of us. Uh, a few weeks ago, at our National Speaker Forum in Memorial Hall, we presented Jenn White, who is the host of National Public Radio's 1A program, and she spoke passionately about the importance of truth, transparency, and trust in journalism on the national scale. In tonight's forum, we're going to literally take a closer to home look. We're going to look at how local media navigates all the issues and all the innovations that have come to the whole landscape of what we call news now. And we're going to look at how news is presented to us in print and on air and by radio and television. With our three extraordinary speakers, each of whom is a leader in their field. Our speakers tonight will be Beryl Love, who's the executive editor and vice president of news for Cincinnati Enquirer, Ann Thompson, who is the digital media producer for CET, our public television station, and Jennifer Merritt, who is the deputy editor, digital editor for WVXU, our public radio station. But before we get into the meat of our program, I'm going to ask Women's City Club President Jeff Dye, who is also our tech expert, managing tonight's Zoom program, to say a few words of welcome. Jeff, your turn.
Welcome to our May Forum. I'm really glad to see people here, and I think more people are joining, and I'm hoping that people aren't having trouble getting on. So we'll keep watching to see if anybody has any issues, and I'll try to let them in any way that I can. We do have the Season Good Luncheon coming up later this month. That's on May 24th at 11:30. That's a really exciting event that's coming up. And then I'll also look forward to our annual meeting, which will be probably June 20th, but we're still working out the details of that. But that's always in June, and we look forward to having people attend that. It's going to be, we still have a lot of things going on during the summer, but otherwise we take a hiatus from most of our forums between now and then. But I don't want to talk too much. I want to get right on to this program, and I'm really excited about our speakers that we have tonight. Thank you.
I am too, and thank you, Jeff. And that's a good reminder that you may have noticed that our current president is a man. So even though we are called Women's City Club, our membership is open to both men and women, and we want to stress that. We hope that everybody will join us. Okay, so tonight I also want to take a moment before we get too far into this to thank the Women's City Club members who also worked to make this particular program. In addition to Jeff and to Beth Soldebarger, who was the chair of the National Speaker Forum and gave us the idea for this follow-up program, I want to thank my committee members, program committee members, Susan Noonan, Sarah Gideons, Jan Seymour, Laurie Frank, Marge Davis, David Siders, and Amy Katzman. They have worked tirelessly all year long to put together some really excellent programs for Women's City Club. They are just an incredibly wonderful committee. A couple housekeeping notes. During the program, we do ask that you keep your audio muted so we don't hear inadvertent background noise. We also encourage you, if you're comfortable with this, to be visible on screen. It's nice to see some faces, not just names in little boxes. So if you want to put your smiling face on screen, we'd love to see you. This program will run until 8:30. We'll have a presentation from each of our speakers, followed by a question and answer session. And for those who might be joining in progress, I want to remind you that this program is being recorded, and it will be available through our website and on YouTube after this. So what are we here to talk about tonight? So much in journalism has changed over the decades. If you're anywhere as old as I am, you might remember when this is how we got our news. We read the Enquirer in the morning, the Post and Time Star in the evening, Well, you got the early evening news from Walter Cronkite or one of his colleagues. And of course, being Cincinnati, we watched Al Shuttlecotty before we went to bed to see what else was going on locally. But now we get breaking news delivered to us 24/7 on multiple platforms. So, how has local media evolved to remain not just relevant, but truly vital in keeping our community informed in this new, very crowded environment? That is something our presenters will be discussing with you over the next hour. So I think we'll start with Jennifer Merritt, who is the deputy editor and digital editor for WVXU. And I would be lying if I told you I understood what those titles actually mean. So we're going to let Jennifer explain all that to you. She'll talk a little bit about her background in her experience in radio journalism, and then tell us about the unique role that public radio has in how you balance the demands of being in touch with local breaking news as well as presenting all the national scheduled programming. How do you find the balance? So Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm Jennifer, Deputy Editor and Digital Editor at WVXU. Deputy Editor essentially means I am in charge of the news division when our news director is out on vacation, like she is at this moment. So it's been a fun week. So I am a graduate of Rutgers University. I was a journalism major and an English minor. I'm originally from New Jersey, so not local to Cincinnati, but my family and I moved here in 2016. And most recently, I just completed an editorial integrity and leadership fellowship with Poynter University or Poynter, which is down in Florida. That is a nonprofit organization founded by the editor, longtime editor who has since passed, but of the Tampa Bay Times, to maintain just journalistic integrity throughout the profession. I also spearheaded Cincinnati Public Radio's DE&I certification with the local organization Eloquate. And I received a diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace certificate from the University of Southern Florida. That was through an online program. The background on me, I had forever wanted to be a writer. I meant to, and I forgot. I still have my 8th grade yearbook that says, with my picture, that says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And it says journalist. So I'm sorry to say that you all don't get to see that today. Maybe that me forgetting was an accident. But ideally, I wanted to work for magazines. And so I entered the market in 2002, sort of just as the internet was starting to become a thing. And as much as I wanted to be in print, I slowly started getting pushed into the direction of digital. And I've worked in that realm for publishers like Time Inc. and Condé Nast, as well as NBC. I did a short stint at a startup. And I have continued to work freelance, mostly doing search engine optimization work, or SEO as it's abbreviated. And that's really like how essentially you try to game Google so that you get into the top search results. And so I resisted that for a very long time. Like I wanted to be a writer, man, and like I was just not going to do anything else but that. But over time, I acquiesced, and I'm ultimately glad I did. I now see the value and the power in doing what you can to make sure that the great work that journalists do are able to reach the eyeballs that it needs to reach, particularly these days, in the days of, deep fakes and, search engine optimization voids of, how people fall victim to conspiracy theories and things like that. So I do want to do a very short slide share for this next piece. Do you all see that graphic?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, sorry, hold on.
Sometimes it takes a minute to pop up. There we go. It's coming now.
Great.
There we go. Got it, Jennifer.
Perfect. So I started at WVXU in 2018 as the station's first ever digital editor, which was kind of crazy to me at the time. They had never had one before that. So there was really nowhere to go but up, which we did. So in 2019, we, for the first time, passed the million mark for web visitors for the first time. And then 2020 happened. And as you all know, things just kind of went bananas between the Trump bump and the pandemic. And after that, we saw some slight declines, which wasn't too concerning to me, as I understood that, 2020 was definitely a unique year. And people, went back to their routines. So you do kind of see here, if you can see my mouse, obviously, I think it's best illustrated in this graphic where you see our bump, and then, we kind of started to decline, and now we're on the way back up. So 2022 was really the year I was able to take all that I had learned digitally and apply it at WVXU. NPR had transitioned stations to a much better content management system that allowed us to do a lot more work around the search engine optimization realm. And that resulted in 2023 being our best year yet, even better than 2020. So 2024 remains to be seen, but it is an election year. So there's that to help us either maintain or grow. So I'm confident that that last point in 2023 will hopefully go a little bit higher than we currently see. Sorry, this is from a past presentation. Let me stop sharing. So the changes that I've seen, as I said, I kind of started just as the internet was becoming a thing for the magazine, print, journalism world. And that by far was the biggest transition. And, I witnessed those who resisted it and not wanting to move digitally. They got, unfortunately, let go. Some really talented people got let go. And that shift from also message boards to social media, people were gathering in spaces that were tied to websites and driving traffic that way. And then Facebook came around and Twitter came around, and all of a sudden that traffic went elsewhere. I've also seen the transition from, people loving newsletters, like those were the next big thing. And then newsletters fell out of fashion and people were unsubscribing like mad, and now newsletters are back again. So I think that is just one example of, particularly in media. I think that idea that everything that's old is new again is no more true than in media. Just like newsletters come back, I do hope that magazines make a comeback too, because I do still love magazines. I have a 10-year-old who had to fill out a thing for Mother's Day last year, where one of the questions was, "What does mom love to do?" And his answer was read magazines. So you may have even heard recently how the supermodel Carly Kloss is bringing back Life magazine back to life. And so you can bet that I'll be subscribing. So as much as I am a digital person, I do still love that print product. I think nothing beats that tangible experience. To me, I still get a rush if I ever see my name in print. It's just not the same, or my byline in print. It's not the same as when I see it online. Don't ask me why, because I'm not quite sure. Print still seems like this, to me anyway, this unattainable, well, not unattainable, but hard to attain to thing that is maybe a bit more discerning than your everyday website. So our challenges going forward, I think number one for me will be maintaining our growth and our reach. I feel like I've sort of used up my bag of tricks, so I'll need to continue to educate myself going forward. Also too, the challenges in listening behavior and how digital can help bridge that gap. Kind of similar to the spikes that we saw digitally that I just showed you. Those were similar for broadcast in that listening habits changed, whereas the news magazines fell off in broadcast, and by news magazines, I mean things like Morning Edition and All Things Considered. They fell off on broadcast, but they picked up with smart speakers, as folks were working from home. And that trend has continued, as people are doing a combination of work from home and going into the office. And then finally, I think probably our biggest challenge going forward, and I think I was just talking actually with my dad this morning about this, but reestablishing the public's trust in media in general. You may have heard how recently NPR had its own kerfuffle with the essay by Uri Berlinger. And that was definitely an interesting learning opportunity on many levels. I think more so for the big folks at NPR than for us as a local station per se, but I definitely think that there are some things that we can learn from that. But even prior to that, big focus of my fellowship at Poynter was clarity and transparency. Those are two seemingly simple founding principles of journalism that I think for a while there, media in general just assumed the public knew, or worse, didn't care about. And so trying to bring that back into the forefront by refocusing on those two things, because, to be fair, I think for any journalist, they never really went away. But broadly speaking, I think maybe journalists perhaps forgot how important they are to remind people that, those are two major tenets of the work that we do. So part of what came out of my fellowship was a standards project, which I will also share with you. Just give me a second here. Find that share button again. Okay. Let's see. So this is something that I just published on April 25th. I worked on this. The fellowship lasted about 8 months, and really it had two prongs to it. It had this outward facing guide about the standards of our journalism, and then we now have an internal guide that really kind of dives into more of the nitty gritty, things around word choice, like why we say, anti-abortion rights versus pro-life, because that is more about the action than the movement, or why we don't estimate crowd sizes because it's too easy to refute. So those sort of things, just are for our journalists to look at internally and be reminded of. But this is something that we put forward to the public about our mission, accuracy, completeness, fairness, our independence, impartiality, transparency. And then we also do some work with media partners. Because we are an NPR member station, we're able to pull in articles from stations really around the country, although I do try to keep it very specific to the tri-state. And then we also have a partnership with WCPO Channel 9, and just being as explicit as possible with folks. Also too, about when we make a mistake, what we do, and we take it, because mistakes, unfortunately, as much as we'd like for them to be rare, they do happen. So the purpose of all of this is really, just to be clear and transparent. So it's not just to our audience, but also to our journalists about why we make decisions that we make. I think Ann actually used to be at WVXU, sadly, until recently. And she can, probably back me up here, that just until we had this document, a lot of it just lived in our news director's head, about why, say we didn't cover bomb threats, or, why, we do certain things that we do, which, wasn't always clear, especially, to someone like myself, who's not from Cincinnati, about why, we would do certain things or cover certain things. So just getting that transparency out there. And both are living documents, meaning that they can and may change at some point, especially, as we will revisit these, and just to make sure that the definitions are matching, what we're doing, and that, we're being as transparent as possible. And if something changes, we'll update it. Just to make sure that everything is in line with what we're doing. So that's kind of my spiel. I don't know if take questions now or later, but
We usually do questions at the end, but you mentioned a relationship, I think, with Channel 9 television. Could you say a little bit more about that? I was surprised. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, so that is something mostly because our broadcast tower is theirs, and we share that with them. So it's part of an arrangement where you might hear us say on air in the morning, 9 first morning weather. We get our weather reports from Channel 9. If there's a news event that we weren't able to cover, and CPO we're able to use their audio, similar with their digital stories, obviously giving them credit.
Right.
I think when the Archbishop, the news about, they had the scoop on his cancer diagnosis. So, we attributed that to them, both online and on air. I mean, we always do try to get, the story ourselves, of course. But when we can't, or if we're in a time crunch, we will credit WCPO. And they're able to do the same with our stories, if we've covered something that they haven't.
That sounds good. Thank you. Having worked for CET as a full-time employee for a while and then now as a contract person, well aware of the budgets that as national media companies that you have. So it sounds like the relationship with Channel 9 lets you use your own resources more fully while not having to pay all the extra money that you don't have. Is the budget crunch still a major problem for public radio?
Not for us. I know it is for others. I think WBUR or WBEZ in Chicago, they just had to go through a round of layoffs. They had just recently merged with the Chicago Sun-Times, which was something, when I first saw that, I was like, oh, that's really smart and really exciting. Because I do have to say, like, we've hired quite a few people in radio from print, and I think that they make a really great fit for radio, because they're wonderful storytellers. There's obviously a learning curve for them, but from a digital perspective, where you have the length and the space to tell more of a story, I think the print reporters do a really great job of that. So yeah, back to your original question, we haven't, thankfully, knock on wood, have had to do that, but it obviously is something that we're, aware of, and we are actually in the process at this moment of, just making sure that we're being as efficient as we can be. And when I say that, I know it sounds very ominous, but it's really just making sure that we are optimizing everything that we possibly can, and making the most out of everything that we do have available to us, and maybe even stopping doing some of the things that aren't quite working, just because we've been doing them forever, doesn't mean that we need to continue to do them.
No, that sounds good. Is there any kind of breaking news about some new thing that you might be doing soon on public radio that you are free to talk about, or not to get you in trouble with the powers that be, but any coming attractions we can look forward to?
Yeah, so some of you might know the name Nick Swartzell. He is a reporter from City Beat, a really fantastic reporter, who has been with us now for maybe 2 years. But we just launched, I'll screen share again. I do have to pull it up. So we just launched this new section, called Long-ish Reads.
Oh.
And so why long?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's because, they're typically a bit, long form is a term that gets used in print journalism a lot, and that's really things that are obviously longer, they're featuring in-depth, more narrative style journalism. And we do that, I think, or Nick in particular does that, and to a certain extent, but these are still radio reports, so they're not, going to be probably more than a page or two on your screen. Because again, it's not like we have a print product that we're putting out. And I can click in just to show you as an example to one of the stories.
Mhm.
But it's, this is just a new section that we've launched as of late, really to corral a lot of the work, the deep investigative stuff that Nick is doing. We also have TT Stern Enzi, who is the artistic director of the Over the Rhine Film Festival. He regularly appears on Cincinnati Edition, which is our daily talk show. So this piece right here is from him, which falls into that. So I'll just kind of show you a bit about what we consider a long-ish. This is a piece Nick did about the area around the Brent Spence Bridge. And, you might look at this and be like, that's not that long at all, but, it's long for radio and it's certainly long for web. And the idea was, there were a couple of things behind it. In one way, we wanted to really highlight the great work that he's doing and how that stands apart from just your standard, this happened today, this is the end result, whereas he's taking a deeper look at these things and really seeing how it impacts the community. So we wanted that to stand apart. It's hopefully something that the underwriting team will be able to sell against. And I'm currently contemplating possibly launching a newsletter tied to it. I'm thinking, weekly, just sort of, and most of these stories I will say tend to be a bit more uplifting. They're not always a bummer. There is some sort of action. You come away from these stories, with knowing what steps are being taken or not taken, or what sort of things, you as a community member are able to do to change the situation. So I'm currently thinking about launching a weekly newsletter tied to this, particularly as we head into November 2024, when, we just know that things are going to get contentious on all sides. To just give people a break, and hopefully provide a moment of levity. This story that I had up about not everybody being thrilled about the Brent Spence companion bridge is maybe not the best example, but most of the things that he does are very you come away from it feeling like there is some action, there is some control that you're able to take over a situation, even if it's just becoming involved, with something in your community or showing up for a certain event or whatever it might be. And I think ultimately, that's the goal, is to, it's part of our mission, is to inform, empower, and engage. And, I think that his long-ish forms reporting really does tend to engage folks.
Your mission is very much like Women's City Club's mission to educate, empower, and engage instead of inform. And when you use the word longish, as you were scrolling through, I'm looking at all that blue text, and I'm pretty sure that means that's all hyperlinks. So those are things you can click on for more information. And if one did that, that would indeed be a very longish story.
Yeah.
But what a good way to give people the immediate resource they need excuse me, to find out more. If you are reading and have a question, you don't have to go off and Google it. You can just click on it. So I think that is a wonderful thing. I'm glad you shared that with us. I had no idea you were doing that. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. And we will have questions. If you've heard anything that Jennifer said that you want to ask about, please do put your questions in the chat. We're going to be checking that. We monitor that, and we will, later in the program, we'll have question and answer time, either live or using your chat. Okay, well, let's move on to Ann Thompson. Ann is the digital media producer for CET, another new title that they didn't have when I worked there full time, that I don't quite know what it is, but she's going to tell us. And I think what's interesting is when when most people think of public television, they think about it as a provider of national news more so than local news. If you CET used to do a lot of production work with programs that they would then air on their station about things like Music Hall or the Zoo or things like that, issues and answers. But in general, if you think about what you see on CET television, a lot of it is national. So Ann, talk a little bit for us. Well, tell us all about your background and all the new initiatives you're up to, but also tell us a little bit about that balance between local and national and especially about the new venture that you're going to tell us about.
Thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to telling you all these things. But first, I just want to say some things piggybacking off of Jenn. So as she mentioned, I worked at WVXU for a long time, and I really want to say that Jenn did a lot of things to really advance the station. I do not believe, Jenn, that you used up all the tools in your tool basket. You have not. And something else that she was involved in, I'm not sure if you're still doing it, but she made it very easy. After I would interview somebody, I would just like enter in some basic information, their name, their email, and then that person would get an email and they could fill out the form if they wanted to. So we could kind of keep track of diversity, what age group, what race, various things if they wanted to come back, pronouns. And so then this would all be stored in a database. So that really helped us make sure we were talking to a variety of people. So Jenn does a lot of good things there. As far as what I'm doing, and Janet, yeah, I also didn't really know what digital producer, and I think my boss and I were talking about this, and we were like, what does that even mean? So I think my title is changing. Like, I'm host of the podcast, and I'm also a producer. As far as my background, it's kind of funny that you have me on in the TV realm here, because most of my background has been in radio. And I was thinking back, and I'm a lot older than Jenn. And so I've been in the business for 37 years, and news has really changed. And I'll talk a little bit about radio and my experience there. And then I'll talk about this new initiative. So just generally, yeah, I have worked in radio in Cincinnati, starting out at 55 KRC. And when I started in the late 80s there were 3 big news departments for radio. So it was 55 KRC, there was 700 WLW, and 1530 WCKY. And we would all compete, and we all had really big news departments. We had like 20 people, which is unheard of now for radio. And of course, we didn't have cell phones, so we would all try to be the first to a payphone, and we had news like every half an hour, and we had news overnight, and we were on call. And so we're extremely busy. If I was out covering stories, I'd be covering like 2 and 3 stories a day. We could do that because we didn't have the web, so we weren't writing web articles. I used to say like radio was easy back then. All you had to do was a microphone, and that was it. You didn't have to take pictures. You didn't have to take videos. All this is, I'm not saying that that's all bad. That's really added to it. But that helped us cover more stories because we were out there, not, also like doing like 10 things for the story. And so, gradually, and that didn't last too long, and then there were cutbacks. So like 80s, early 90s, and then it was like, oh, you're having to do more with a smaller staff, and stations were sold. And so Jenn's right, like WVXU is doing very well. They have a big news department. For a long time, though, that stations really did not. And so that was really discouraging. As far as television, I did work some in television in Dayton, doing some anchoring up there, and I just do my little reporting on city cable. We do the Findlay Market opening day parade. And so I know, Janet, you had said like, well, what about podcasts, like podcasts for TV and for public TV? And so you're right, like at least in Cincinnati, we don't have a news department. So we're not doing a daily turn of news stories, even though all of us on our new team have a background of news. So Mark Lammers, who's the executive producer, he used to produce news out in Colorado. He's also worked out in LA. And so my colleague, Hearns Laguerre Jr., he still works part-time in Detroit, but he's from New York and has worked there and in Detroit. And then we recently hired Emiko Moore, to be based in Dayton as a multimedia journalist. And she has for years worked for NBC News, the network in New York. And so, you know, as far as like local news, like how are we getting into this at CET? Mark wanted to create kind of like a public service, like just covering community issues. And he was trying to figure out how we were going to do this. And so he had this idea for about a year or so with another woman, Gloria Skursky in Dayton. And their hook was when they found out about solutions journalism. I had personally never heard of that. And it's when you look at you look at some issue, problem, and you look at what is being used to solve that problem. Not that there's any one solution for anything, but if you can do some investigative reporting and see what's working in other cities and how it could possibly work here, that's what we wanted to investigate. And why a podcast for TV? We eventually will have broadcast shows starting in the fall, but we wanted to kind of see what was going to bubble up as like the best solutions to, in season 1, we're talking about the housing crisis. And certainly everybody is noticing that the house prices have risen and so have rent dramatically. So we have done a few episodes for the podcast, and the latest one just came out today. It's what we call this particular one that came out today, a solutions sidebar. It was a little bit different because it was a straight interview with the Rothsteins, if you're familiar. Richard and Leah Rothstein, they wrote the book, The Color of Law and Just Action. On Just Action was how do we right these wrongs related to segregation. And so for these episodes, the first one we looked at, not that we want to always be focused on Cincinnati, but we looked at what the port had done, where the port had bought about 200 homes from an out-of-town investor who was going bankrupt. And the port wanted to figure out a way to keep these homes affordable. People were renting in these homes, and they wanted to see if those people who were renting could buy them. And so they're in the processes of fixing them up. And originally, I said to one of the producers, like, oh, this is, because I'm always like focused on the future, like, well, this is like old news, but it's like, well, no, it's so other cities are looking at this, and that makes it new. Like it was so like, groundbreaking, and Milwaukee is trying to copy it, and other cities are calling, and they're still fixing it up. And these people have an opportunity through some education with WIN, working in neighborhoods, to try to buy the homes. And so that's what our first episode, and I won't go through all of them, but just to give you one other example, is the second episode was, well, we have all this office space, much of it empty. Can we turn that into apartments? And, that is not as easy as it sounds. Like many developers say, I'd rather just start from ground up. Like it's really hard. You have to have the right building. There's like a small percentage that can be turned into apartments. Of course, you have to change like the heating and cooling and all that stuff. And in case you're wanting to know, like, well, would that be affordable, like capital A, affordable? And that's not really like affordable. It's not subsidized. It's just like, it's a lot of it's luxury housing. But then we interviewed somebody who studied a bunch of cities, and he has realized that, okay, well, that's not all bad, because those people that are moving into these apartments who maybe have more money than some other people, well, that frees up other housing, and then people can move into what they had, and then down the line, and housing can possibly get more affordable. So the goal is try to help people. And with this podcast, we have 2 multimedia journalists. So you might wonder, like, well, it's a podcast. What are they doing? Because they're doing video. So, and talking about, like what Jenn was saying, you want to reach more people, and they're kind of, the audio airs in the podcast, but they have a video story that is online. And I'll tell you, you can search it out at cetconnect.org under Brick by Brick. Brick by Brick is the name of the podcast. And you'll see some of those videos where, for example, the office to apartment buildings, Hearns Laguerre did 2 stories. One, he went up to Dayton and did like more luxury. And then he also did another story here in Cincinnati where it was affordable housing, the Barrister. It was like the first affordable housing they've had in 30 years in the downtown business district. And people who are moving in there are thrilled to get something like this. So their stories are online. And then I will on occasion also do stories. I was just in Avondale where we did an episode on connected communities. That's the proposed zoning changes for Cincinnati. And we focused on middle housing. And as cities try to create more middle housing, like duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, they have found that that hasn't always been successful, even though they've changed zoning because of there aren't the developers lined up to build that type of housing. So we went to Avondale and I did kind of a walk and talk with a developer, Kai Lures of Kiker Development, and he built these townhomes in Avondale. On Hale Avenue near Harvey. And so, you know, we see that having a podcast, broadcast shows, sharing them out, you know, on YouTube and, you know, various platforms can really help. And also, you probably know this, Janet, but CET has other, they have other podcasts. So we're not the first. They have a podcast with the host of the art show, Rodney Beal, I think is his name. And also there is this a broadcast show called The Baking Journal, but she does these short videos of really creative things, puts them up on YouTube. For example, like I think she called it a tea bomb, where, you know, not a bath bomb, but a tea bomb where you make these things and you put in like a tea bag and flowers and various things, and you put it in hot water. So we're kind of experimenting to get more viewers and listeners for that. I don't know if you want me, so that's like about what I'm doing now. I don't know if you want me to talk about how, you know, I think one of the questions was, you know, what are some important qualities for a journalist and, you know, what's changed? And I don't know if you want me to go into that at all.
You certainly can. I mean, we like to like I think I said in my email, I'm not by no means the expert on this. That's why we want you, the experts, to tell us what you want to talk about. But I do want to make a comment. What you were saying about what you're doing with the podcast, how you're going out and getting the backsides of the stories. When I was doing a program, there's a documentary called A Lion in the House about children with cancer, filmed at Cincinnati Children's, that CET was very involved with. And we did a big thing about that, a big premiere. And one of the things I said in the introduction of that was, what the good thing about public television is it looks closer when everybody else wants to look the other way. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're still doing, that you're taking that closer look, that perhaps the daily TV news people, and I do want to mention to everybody, we did invite some local anchors, several, to attend, and we were not successful in getting anyone to commit to come to the program. I think they're just really busy. I don't want that to sound negative. I think they're just really busy, and it's maybe not the thing that their managers want them to do. So, but that is a luxury, I think, if you will, that public radio and TV has, is to maybe set your agenda. Does that ring true to what you know about both sides of that, Ann?
Most definitely. I mean, when I was at WVXU, I had a lot of leeway as far as going out and covering stories, like just something like, for example, leading up to Riverfest, and I would just go to the barge and interview Rozzies and, you know, the whole setup, and I would spend like a couple of hours there. And yeah, there certainly is a lot of leeway. I did technology stories when I was there as well. I know CET and Think TV, they're owned by the same company. They do a lot of documentaries. And so somebody was just explaining like what they have in the pipeline, and they do like a couple a year. And that really takes a lot of time and resources. Like, for example, one of them that they finished last year was part 3 of the Dayton Arcade. So they did 3 parts to this, where it was like at one point going to be sold on eBay, this beautiful building, and Dayton leaders, even though it was like in the midst of the pandemic, they, along with developers, were able to make this happen. So you're right, they are able to devote more time than, let's say, the regular TV. And I have worked in regular TV newsrooms, and it's a very busy place. Right, you wouldn't, since, you know, we're not at CET Think TV putting out a daily newscast, so that frees us up to do other things. And the podcast and Brick by Brick, it takes like more digging than I expected. So a lot of this data, I know Jenn is good with data. Like I really haven't worked someplace where like you're kind of like an investigative reporter. You are trying to sort through data and find out if things were true and find out if these plans that other cities are doing are actually working. So it's been a learning experience for sure.
So it sounds like Brick by Brick and the other podcast might be maybe the wave of the future for public broadcasting, especially if you are looking to be more the local source for the bigger stories, the behind the scenes stories. So
yes, right. I think that it's certainly another way to engage the audience. And as I mentioned, like the one of the program directors was talking today about what we're doing as far as and I don't know exactly what I can say and what I can't say, but I see more and more digital efforts to try to expand the viewership in, you know, in a different way. Like I was mentioning the baking journal on the YouTube and using
right.
that more often.
Do you think that the podcast might ever evolve into a regular program? I mean, not that we don't love Rick Steves and that we don't love the Antiques Roadshow, but sometimes you're looking for something new to watch when you turn on CET at night. Do you think any of the podcasts might eventually become a regular
Yes.
aired program?
Yes. So brick by brick, we intend to, beginning this fall in September, start launching broadcast episodes. So
Ah,
these will be half-hour programs. And so that's why in the podcast, we're seeing like what's going to kind of bubble up at the best ideas. Not that we're going to just like repeat the podcast, but we'll have new angles. And we'll just have like one show a month. So we have a small team. So it's only 4 people. And so we'll have to be doing the podcast and be doing the broadcast show kind of at the same time. And then the art show that is, I'm not sure how long that is. It might only be like 10 minutes or so. That's based in Dayton. He does have a podcast. And then the baking journal, that is a broadcast show. I'm not sure how often it airs, but then at least like once a week, I think she posts something new on YouTube. So that is the goal, to kind of expand and do it in that way digitally.
and of course, the success of the Great British Baking Show has led you to want to do that. I'm sure that had a factor in there.
Yeah, and then so many are just creative ideas. Like she was making bread, and before she put it in the oven, she was painting flowers on it using some kind of like food coloring gel or something. And then she got out of the oven. It was great. It was like, gosh, you know, just so like innovative ideas. So apparently that is really generating a lot of interest. Stephanie is her name.
That sounds good. And you mentioned there was something else that you wanted to speak about, and I should stop asking you questions and let you talk.
Oh, no, I just didn't know. Like, you just had some questions, and I know Jenn answered a lot of them. Like, what do you consider to be the important qualities that all journalists should embrace? And, you know, and some other questions. And I guess that's kind of basic common sense, but I always would strive to just present a complete story. So in other words, if I was sent to a news conference and it only had one side, which often that is the case, then you would seek out the other side, just to be fair. And if you couldn't get anybody to call you back, then you would just say, like, so-and-so didn't call me back in time for this broadcast. And, you know, I was saying before, like, radio used to be easy. But in radio, as Jenn was referencing, things are very short. Stories are very short. So when I was in commercial radio, the longest you could have a story was 40 seconds. And you did multiple versions. You did well, and that's usually my voice wrapped around sound. So then the sound is like 10 seconds or so. And it is kind of difficult to write short. You're trying to get all the information. And back in those days, we didn't have the web. So here you can provide many more resources, like for example, on Brick by Brick, then the web article is not the same as the podcast. So I'll be able to provide, you know, a lot more and the links to everything. And so there is, you know, in the videos, and I definitely do see that as an advantage from before, but it's just different. It really is.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think that for reasons we do not know what has gone on, but we don't expect that our third speaker will be joining us. Susan and I have both tried to reach out with no success. So, which means we have more time for questions and answers with the two people we do have. And before we open it up to the floor, I'm going to ask one other question that really, uh, I do have a background. I've never been as professional as either of you have been. I've never gone at it full time, but I was a newspaper columnist for a while and actually got a first place SPJ award, which I'm extremely proud of. But I haven't really done it as my full-time work. I always kind of dabbled. But what concerns me as a consumer of both print and television and radio is how do you look at I don't want to say the onslaught of digital, that's a little harsh, but clearly digital media is taking over. The fact that people, if something happens and they want to know about it right now, and they've got 55 channels they can go to find out. Do you see any negative to that? Do you feel like there's something special in your media, whether it's radio or TV, that you're losing because of the digital? Or do you think that digital has really served to expand what you used to do and just bring it into the new millennia? So who wants to go first? Jen, you're smiling. Do you want to try it?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Give me a break, but you're up next, Ann, so you don't get away. Okay.
I do think digital really, the goal of the internet, right, was to democratize information. And I think it certainly did that, maybe to a detrimental extent. I mean, that's arguable for sure. But it certainly made a lot of things more accessible. It took away there's always been this criticism of journalism because, and it's true to a certain extent, we decide what warrants coverage, right? So that right there is a bit of gatekeeping. And that took away that gatekeeping because you had folks on Twitter talking about things, you had folks on, Facebook, whatever. And I look at, again, like I look at the internet as, a challenge or a puzzle, I would say, to figure out, like, how can I make sure that our stories are getting the eyeballs that it deserves? And if that requires that we do so here's a really great example, actually. It's a story from Texas Public Radio. Their State House reporter will leave the State House and she'll talk about what just happened inside the State House itself while she's reapplying her makeup. And it sounds so silly, but it does so incredibly well. And if that is what gets people to care about what is happening at their, that their state houses and pay attention, that I don't care. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
I think that as long as people are getting involved and caring, and they feel like this news applies to them, because I know historically speaking, a lot of people haven't felt that news, is about them or for them. I think that is a good thing. I think where media messed up, and I saw this happen, particularly when I was at Time Inc. and they cut a deal with Facebook, was kind of handing over all of their good content to places like Facebook or, the Google algorithm or whatever. So now, you might get annoyed by the amount of newsletters you get asked to sign up for, or the amount of push alerts that you get from any one news organization. But when you think about it, that is really the one way for us to sort of interrupt your day and say, like, hey, you should care about this, right? Like, this is the one way for us to really push the importance of a particular story. And really, like, that's going to be particularly for newsletters. I launched the station's first news-focused newsletter, and the response to it since it launched in 2018 has just been really phenomenal, which just kind of shows the that was a gap that, or, that people were looking for, specifically for local news that wasn't just focused on sports or, things of that nature. It's your one true engaged audience, and that's certainly a smaller portion than people who might be tuning in on broadcasts on a daily basis, but they're still, they're there, they're tuning in for you, they're clicking on that story. So they shouldn't necessarily be discounted. I mean, as you saw on that graph earlier, I mean, our daily reach web-wise, certainly bests our broadcast tune-in numbers at this stage of the game. So, as much as, we're not going to just like disregard broadcast, you just kind of, need to reprioritize and kind of go where the people are, I think.
Meet them where they are. Right. Those numbers were impressive. Thank you for that, Jennifer. And then Ann will let you answer it. Then we will move to, we got lots of good questions in chat and we will get to those. But Ann, let you have a chance to answer that.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if I have anything to add, but I did want to, I see a question that I do want to answer.
Okay.
I mean, I'll answer all of them, but so yeah, Carolyn, you wanted to know, is there always another side of the story? I would argue that there is. It may not be a viewpoint that you agree with, but I'm old school and I was always taught that you include other. So let's say it depends on what you're talking about, and I'd like to hear an example, but let's say I'm at the courthouse and somebody has been sentenced to a long sentence and they did horrible things. Like, I'm still going to go talk to that person and find out, like, I'm just going to shout out. I mean, at VXU, we didn't really cover these stories, but in my past life I did. Like, why did you do it? Like, I mean, you always want to hear from the other person if there's a demonstration, and it's largely, whatever. And then there's a couple of people over the side you do need to acknowledge. They're here and this is what they said. So I like to let the listener decide. I want to present all the viewpoints and then you can decide. I'm not going to be the gatekeeper and say, like, well, because I don't agree, like, I'm not going to present their viewpoint. But maybe if anybody wants to unmute their mic and clarify, can.
Well, what Carolyn wrote for the second part, Carolyn Miller wrote, is not only is there another side to the story, but how do you decide whether the opposing viewpoints are truly worthy of equal mention or any mention? And I think, Ann, we just heard you say that you believe they're always worthy to be included, that news has to tell both sides of the story. Jennifer, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say to start, I mean, I think Ann for sure is one of the fairest reporters I've ever worked with. And I miss that now that she's left. She was always, there'd be a certain like conversation happening in the newsroom and she was always yeah, but what about, so it's definitely something that, I was just reading an interview too with I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but he's an executive editor at the New York Times. This was I'll get the link and put it in the chat because I found it really, really interesting. If you follow the media, which I kind of assume you all do here, the New York Times as of late has gotten criticized for essentially, not really hyping up Biden as much as a certain set of folks think that they should. And his response was, we're not here to tell you who to vote for. Just as Ann said, like, we're here to give you that information and let you decide what you think is, the right choice to make come November. One thing we've adopted to combat particularly misinformation or, outright lies is something called a truth sandwich. So basically, state the truth, then you state the falsehood, and then you state the truth again. Again, to drive home the point, like, this is the truth of the matter. So I think the example that they gave was, talking about if someone were to mispronounce my name, saying like, Ann Thompson constantly or Jenn Merritt says that Ann Thompson constantly, says her name wrong on the radio, when in fact, we've reviewed and saw that she's pronounced it correctly every time, but still Jenn insists on saying that, she's saying this when it's not in fact true. So that's a silly example, but, to kind of get to the point of it. And again, just making sure that the truth is really what is first and foremost, and hopefully by leading with that and ending with that, that is what people retain, not the misinformation.
That's good. Yeah, that's good to know. This question from Justin Jeffrey is a good follow-up. He's asking, can you talk about traditional news versus Fox News, Newsmax, etc.? So that could be both radio and television. So who wants to go first?
Right, I can start. So I think as a journalist, it's always good to know what everybody is reporting. So I watch all the channels, like the left and the right and the middle. And I think that, I try to encourage my friends and family to do the same. So you know what's being reported. I am not a fan of organizations that give only one side, as we just talked about. I definitely think that even if you agree with some national newsmaker and you're on a national show, I think you shouldn't just ask them softball questions. There should be challenging questions, and you should have both sides on. Obviously, that's not what those channels are about. On cable, they have their viewers. MSNBC has its viewers. Fox has its viewers. So I guess it's just, it's not going to matter what I say. They're going to have who they're going to have. I'm not a fan of, organizations in stations that just have one side. But that's what they do.
Okay. And Jenn, what do you want to say about traditional media versus media like Fox News and Newsmax?
I think, again, it kind of goes back to the idea of transparency, right? I don't know that a Fox News or an MSNBC, they certainly present as news, and to a certain extent they are, but I would look at them more as analysts, right? As commentary, perspectives. And there certainly is journalistic qualities to all of that. But absence of that balanced reporting, I think that's where I almost wish, and I don't know what that identifier is, but I wish they had another identifier for themselves. I think, and again, just being transparent to the public, you're going to come here and you're going to get one side. And I think to a certain extent, their audiences know that. That's why they go there, and that's why they've been so successful, was because there's clearly an appetite for that. But you do have people who fall down the middle or who are undecided, who still need that information. And I think that's, where, I think that particularly on the local level, and I've really noticed that, since I started, or even really, I would argue since I moved to Cincinnati, where, when I was living in New York and New Jersey, so much of the focus, was New York Times and New York Magazine, and, they set the agenda. And, I came here and really started working in the local spaces. And I was like, it's a shame that those are the outlets setting the agenda, because these are the folks who are reporting on what should be setting the agenda. These are the issues that are really going to matter. And it's unfortunate that, if a local issue, it takes it bubbling up to the national media for it to get that level of attention, which, so it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, an issue is getting the attention, the broad attention that it deserves. But unfortunately, a lot of local folks aren't paying attention to it until they see it in the national media. So
that happens.
The minuses.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in my chat, but I had a little glitch where my program shut down for a minute and then came back. So if I've missed your question, please put it in again. Or since we are a smaller group tonight, If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, I'm going to invite you to do so.
I
So,
asked a few questions
yes, Jeff.
earlier. One that she said was, it seems the lines between print news, TV, and radio outlets are blurring. You all have a web presence using video, podcasts, and articles. WVXU is already collaborating with WCPO. Could you imagine a merger in the future into a multimedia communications company?
Mm.
So that was Beth Sullivarger put that in earlier, and then she had another question later. So there's a little backlog there, Janet.
I'm Jeff. I
Okay.
had a little glitch where mine kind
Oh,
of
it's okay. I know you said that. It's
yeah.
okay.
So I'll take that one. You know, when we say, I don't know, collaborating is kind of a strong word. It's really more of a partnership where we're able to kind of exchange content. And when we do that, it is pretty rare. But, you know, could you imagine a merger in the future into a multimedia communications company? You know, I have to say when WBEZ merged with the Chicago Sun-Times, I was really excited for that. I was like, this is a really cool opportunity for, you know, two powerhouses to come together and do really great work. And I have to say, given what just recently happened this summer where they ended up laying people off, I think mostly in their podcast spaces, I'm not as jazzed about it now. And not just mostly because I think, you know, if something like that were to happen, you know, newspapers do it in a way, they operate very differently than, especially public media in particular. You know, newspapers are beholden to shareholders in a way that public media isn't. You know, so it's kind of, I think when I look at it from that utopia view, I was like, this is really amazing. But when you kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of it, I don't know that it is necessarily a smart move, but I know a lot of times that's the way, you know, news organizations need to survive, is to kind of come together and work together in ways. So I don't know. I mean, could we see, and I know Barrel's not here, so I can say this, but you know, where WVXU and the Inquirer come together, you know, I don't know. I hope not, because I don't want to be beholden to Gannett shareholders. You know, we're lucky right now that we don't have to do that. But you know, could it happen? Sure. So I don't know that you know, really answers your question. I see the potential in it for sure, as long as it's done, you know, with the right intentions in mind, and it's not just an acquisition for the sake of making money or having, you know, really big numbers to talk about digitally. It's done because you're going to truly collaborate and expand on the reporting.
Right.
And then part two of Beth's question, I can take that. So the question was, how can we keep responsible reporting at the local level financially sustainable? So that is the challenge. I mean, when I was in commercial radio and they made huge cutbacks, it was kind of like, okay, salespeople make us money. News people cost us money. So we're going to, you know, eliminate, you know, 2/3 of the news department. And it's like, well, your programming is important. Like, what are you going to have if you don't have any programming? So for our project, I know at CET Brick by Brick, they just went out and got donors. They kind of laid it all out there, and big companies were fortunately receptive to that. I know that's not like daily reporting. This is a special project, but hopefully, you know, just season one, we look at the housing crisis. This continues with other, like maybe environmental or other things in the other seasons. But that is the challenge. And you have seen local stations make cutbacks. Various TV stations, you used to always have like a crew go out on a story. Well, now it's just like one person, like multimedia journalists. You do everything. You do the camera, the lighting, the reporting. And so I guess that's how they're trying to save money. But that is a big question that has to be answered.
You kind of led into another question that Justin Jeffrey put in chat, asking to what degree do you think the news business, meaning the profit motive, has affected journalism? So that's you know, the need to make money, has that really colored what goes on in journalism?
Yeah, I just quickly backtracked to what Ann was saying. You know, I think the easiest, you know, way to answer, I think it was Carolyn's question is to donate, even if it's not, if it's just $25, come a fund drive, do it during, a match period where that 25 becomes 75, do whatever amount that you can, because it really truly does make a difference, I think, for both of our outlets. But to that degree of, the need for business, because I worked a large portion of my career in the consumer side of things, and I could see how, when business wasn't doing well, unfortunately, the first thing to go was the writers and the reporters and the fact checkers and the copy editors. And there's actually a really great article. Who did it? I'm trying to remember. That kind of talked about Gannett in particular, and how they have taken over so many small papers, and then they cut them to make a profit, and just how that has sort of denigrated journalism. And so I think kind of looking at journalism as a profit maker is a terrible way to look at it. I mean, obviously I'm biased in that, and with that perspective. But, I don't necessarily know that it's ever going to be a moneymaker. Like, I actually have a huge issue with paywalls. I understand why folks like the New York Times and the Washington Post does it, but I'm like, that, takes away from the people who need it most, that access to that information. That is not like the spirit of journalism. So it's, I think that I'll see again if I can find that and put it in the chat. Because it really did a fantastic job of sort of detailing the downfall of a lot of papers that are owned by these sort of mega corporations that come in and take them over.
I recall there was a lot of concern when Gannett first took over the Enquirer from people who have been long-term residents and subscribers, like, what's going to happen to our paper? And I know, thanks to the recent rains and the fact that my 100-year-old basement's been flooding, I've discovered a treasure trove of old newspapers that I didn't get around to reading. We're talking, this is embarrassing, but 2014, 16, and I had forgotten how big the newspaper used to be, and how many things we don't have anymore. We don't have editorial cartoons. We don't have columnists except one or two on a Sunday. I feel like, and I don't want to pick on the Enquirer because Burl's not here, but it seems to me from what you're saying that both radio and TV have found ways to expand. And it's true that the Enquirer does have an online presence. That's how I read the paper. But it doesn't have this depth of background reporting that you two have talked about so freely. So that's an interesting question to think about for another day. But what, Jen, Ann, did you want to comment on that last question?
Well, I was going to comment on the question, to what degree do you think the need business, like the profit motive, affected journalism? And this is just kind of a sidebar to that. So I just wanted to assure you that every place that I've worked, the news director has said to the sales manager, look, there's a wall between us, and we cannot have you suggesting ideas, like basically influencing us, telling us we have to do a story because it's your client and your client has such and such. There's a wall set up there, an editorial kind of wall. And so we never really were influenced by, in case you were wondering, like the sales, like, hey, you have to do the story because, that will please the client. We really didn't face that.
Right. And Jeff Dye, you started to ask a question before, I think, and I cut you off. What did you want to ask? Do you remember?
I didn't think I had a question. I think I was more articulating the second question that Beth had, which has already been answered. So.
Yeah, and Janet, one thing I want to clear up too, like you said that we have it figured out. I don't know that we have it figured out. I think we're just in a lucky period right now. Because, what is that saying? like uncertainty is the only certainty. Like that is
That's true.
very true. But I do think folks have really started to realize the importance of local journalism, and when they're able to, are able to support it.
Well, it seems that you definitely have expanded your outreach. The stats that you shared about how many people you're reaching, there's proof right there. So again, I'm going to invite anyone else who's on this call who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question out loud. Please feel free to do so. We're a nice civilized group. We can do that. Anybody?
Janet,
Going
can you hear me?
Yes, hello. Yes.
Hi,
Yes, we can.
This is Helen. It seems like from what I've been listening to that public broadcasting seems to be balanced news, and you have the living document or the internal standards. Are there any government standards, or is that what makes it a free press and the government can't help to bring balanced and truthful news to other stations?
Yes. Go,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Yeah, no, the other, and I mean, that is, one of the myths that I'll debunk right here. I think Ann could speak to this too. Like the government actually gives us very little funding. Certainly if it were to go away, it would be detrimental, but it's not like we'd go off the air the next day. We'd have to make that up somehow. And so, no, they don't get any say whatsoever in our coverage. Actually, one thing that was eye-opening to me when I first came here was I didn't realize how much the State House News Bureau here in Ohio, is partially funded by the Ohio State House. But I know those, and I know Ann knows the journalists there, and they are phenomenal at what they do, at reporting both sides and being fair. And I do think, for all the flack that journalists and politicians get, I think the politicians, to a certain extent, they understand that firewall of sorts. Like you might think of, our political reporter, Howard Wilkinson, was just, trying to track down Bill Seitz recently, and Bill, to his credit, was like trying, they just kept missing each other. Like he was really trying to get in touch with Howard to comment. And I was actually thinking about that because I think we're going to have to publish a little story before they can connect. And I was like, well, how can I be fair to Bill where it's not that, he didn't want to talk to us, which is the case. And that happens a lot, where folks don't want to talk to us. And when that happens, we state so. We say we reached out to such and such's campaign and they declined an interview. So again, just trying to be fair to Bill Seitz and say, he made an earnest effort to talk to us. He knows, and he'll certainly, I've heard him do it. He'll rib us, for our supposed biases, but he also, I think, understands, the importance of talking to us. So, there's not, if there's any.
Helen, did you want to expand on that?
Yeah.
Yes, I understand, and I appreciate the answer.
Okay. Ann, did you wish to speak to any of that, or should we ask for a new question?
Well, I can just add that, of course, Helen probably knows this, but there are sunshine laws. So in other words, there are certain, there has to be, out in the open information. There's certain times, if it relates to going into executive session, governmental things are allowed to do that. But generally, we have to have access in terms of, if the question was going to, can the government, instruct us how we can cover things, and they can't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more very quick question before we wrap up. Anyone else like to raise a question from the floor? Or the screen, I guess I should say. Question from the screen. Okay, well, hearing none, I want to, the teacher in me wants to tell you to please be sure that you click on those three little dots at the top of your chat box and save the chat tonight, because it is full of wonderful resources for you. People have posted links to articles. to a lot of other good information. So take a minute before you sign off to click on your Save Chat button so you have all these resources to hand. Because when we put the recording on the website, you can listen to the conversation again. But sadly, I don't know of any way to make the chat show up in that. So please do take a time to do that.
Can I throw one out real quick? I couldn't get
Yes,
my
Justin.
mute button off. So I just wanted to maybe have them end on, do they have any hope for the future of journalism and maybe, new models or it not continuing to decline?
That's a good, hopeful question. What is the future? What is your hope for the future of journalism? I think in my notes I phrased, if you had a crystal ball, what do you see coming?
No, thanks for that question. First, before I forget, I was going to ask, in case you're wondering about my odd setup, I'm down in my recording booth. I also do some audiobook narration. So I'm down here in the basement with my soundproof things. So yeah, I have a lot of hope. And, I mentioned that Brick by Brick uses solutions journalism. And I think more and more newsrooms across the country are using the solutions journalism model because people are getting tired of just hearing bad news and like, here's the facts and sorry, there's no solution. And we know there's no easy solution. But let me just give you a quick example. Now, this one is in Florida, down where you are, Susan. So I saw a TV news story where it was focusing, it was a few years old, like the hurricane, the last hurricane you had down there. And so, lots of things were destroyed. And the reporter said, did his opening, and he was in a neighborhood where there was like no damage. And it turns out there is this development where it was started by like a former NFL person, and his goal was to design a development that was hurricane proof, and he did it. And so there was just a few shingles that had come off of roofs. Of course, part of solutions journalism, as you look at the limitations, it took years to develop and it was expensive. But I think more and more stations are trying to look for solutions to problems. And I think listeners and viewers will be more interested in that and keeping up with news if they can see, some hope with certain things.
That's good. And Jennifer, where do you see hope?
Yeah, I would think that, and to kind of piggyback off of what Ann was saying, I feel like news in general is listening to their audiences more. And therefore, giving them what they actually want versus this is what I think you should know. And that idea again of, everything that's old is new again. We might be in like a tenuous period right now, but, I would think, coming out of, November 2024, no matter what the outcome is, folks start to, realize the importance of having reporters on the ground, fair and balanced reporters, and doing, the work that needs to be done so that, you're not just specifically for, and again, even if they are a smaller audience of people who are in the middle, like as long as they're dedicated and they're engaged, they're every bit as important. I don't need the big numbers. What I really want is the engagement. And I think that is certainly there, as you've seen sort of in at least some of our web numbers, for sure. So, to me, it's become less of a numbers game and more of an engagement game.
Awesome. Rhonda put a question in chat, and I know we do want to say goodnight in a moment, but her question follows up on a different kind of hope. How do you encourage the work being done by the college and university, the students who are in the journalism programs? They are the future of journalism. How do you encourage hope, make them hopeful to enter this field? And I know you probably have internships, and I know you probably have people who work for you and do that kind of work, but what do you say as professionals to encourage them to get into it?
I think, I think a lot of, I know that the student journalists at, places like Harvard and Columbia have been getting a lot of kudos for the work that they've been doing on the encampments that have been happening there, which I think is, fantastic. I think the earlier we can show them that the work that they're doing matters, the better. I have an intern who's going to be starting with me here in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to have her do something on like how to spot deep fakes. And that's the kind of thing that's going to have a life, well beyond, it kind of came out of, I'm not going to lie, like that. I don't know if you saw the picture of Katy Perry, that was a deep fake, and even fooled her own mother that she thought she was at the Met Gala. But so again, just talking to people and showing that, I've had a couple of interns do stories that, have actually done really well for us. Like our last intern did something on like how mail-in voting works in Ohio. And that's when all of the disinformation was going around about how mail-in ballots are insecure and all of this stuff. And that's where I ended up doing really well. So I think just setting them up for success and showing them that, these are ways in which, the work that you're doing, no matter how, minor or silly it might seem, you think to yourself like, oh, most people know how to spot deep fakes. Like that's not really hard-hitting journalism. And true, it's not, but it's still information that people want. So I think that giving them early wins, I think is really helpful.
Oh, thank you. And Ann, do you have a closing message of hope for our upcoming journalists?
Oh, sure. I've always been a fan of interns. And so I had a couple internships myself when I was in college, and it really helped me to see how things work in the real world. So just, I'm sure we'll have interns at CET, but when I was at WVXU, Jenn did a great job with the program. And I think it's important to take them out on stories, not to just give them like little menial jobs, but making phone calls or whatever, maybe that's necessary too, but actually to take them out in the field and just kind of show them how you put together a story, how you edit a story. And as Jenn was referencing, people that go to Harvard, like Frank, we had an intern at Harvard. He knew more than I did. Like, what are you doing here, Frank? Like, he was still in school. Yeah, just, showing them like, this is, I've had a great career. I would definitely recommend it. And I just try to encourage them. And so I think that, yeah, many of them have a bright future.
Yeah. And one last thought too, like learning from them, to Ann's point, right? Like they come in and they're talking about TikTok, and you're, as someone who's older, you're kind of like, TikTok. But, if that's how they're getting their news, then we need to pay attention to it, So I like to see it as a symbiotic relationship. Like they're not just teaching, or we're not just teaching them something, they're coming in and teaching us something too.
The learners are the teachers. Well, on that note, I want to say on behalf of Women's City Club and everyone who attended tonight, I thank you so much, Ann and Jennifer, for joining us. You have both shared so much about your personal stories and so much frank conversation about what is going on in radio, in television, in media in general. We're grateful to you for your participation this evening, and we really do appreciate that you took the time to be here. I know we all want to like clap for you. I miss being in person. We can't stand up and cheer for you, but we are all cheering. I also want to remind you again to make sure you copy the chat. There's great stuff in there. And I wouldn't be a good Women's City Club person if I didn't remind you to check the Women's City Club website. It's womenscityclub.org. This program will be posted there and you can watch it again, but you can also find out about the upcoming programs and events. There's always something going on with Women's City Club, and very specifically this coming, well, not coming, 3 weeks out, on Friday, May 24th, we're having our Season Good Luncheon with the guest speaker, Dr. Whitney Gaskins. She's the Associate Dean of Inclusive Excellence and Community Engagement in the University of Cincinnati College of Engineering. She's also the director of the Gaskins Foundation, which works with various community partners to provide educational and opportunities and experiences for individuals to go into STEM fields. So at this wonderful luncheon, which is going to be, I think, at the Hilton right here in Hyde Park.
The Hilton Garden Inn.
Hilton Gardens, yeah, right there on Dana, right?
Right.
Okay. And we also we give away Marion A. Spencer Education Awards. and we invite the recipients to come to this event. So it's also a great time to stand up and cheer for some of those students who are our future. So join us on May 24th if you can. Check us out on the website. Remember, men and women are most welcome to join Women's City Club, and membership is open all year round. We encourage you to join us and help us continue our mission to educate and empower and engage, so together we can all build an even greater Cincinnati. And on that note, I think being a TV person, we're about 5 minutes off schedule, but wow, what good conversation we've had. So thank you so much, everyone who came. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you, Jennifer and Ann.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
so much.
Great program. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ann and Jennifer.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, great.